Texas Week with Rick Casey is made possible by the generous support of the William and Salome Scanlon Foundation, supporting educational, environmental, and Hispanic cultural initiatives. The John and Florence Newman Foundation, encouraging an informed community. The Daniel J. Sullivan Family Foundation, and visionaries like members of KLRN.
I'm Rick Casey, and this is a special edition of Texas Week. Last Saturday's election was a low turnout affair in which no candidate owned as much as a third of the vote. It did determine that San Antonio will be led by a woman, but they are women of contrast. One is a consummate Latina politician who has spent 24 years in the legislature. The other is a trained city planner, an African-American technocrat who has spent years in City Hall as a staffer, a councilwoman, and the interim mayor. Both will join me to talk about their plans for San Antonio. Ross Ramsey of the Texas Tribune will discuss how the battle between the House and the Senate over small tax cuts has been joined by a battle over weak ethics reform. And this week I am ceding my last word time to the candidates. Texas Week starts now.
This week's most important stories, people, and issues in depth. This is Texas Week with Rick Casey.
Joining me now is the woman who will serve as San Antonio's mayor for the next 2 years. We just don't know which one. Leticia Van de Putte, who led the first round with 30% of the vote, has served in the legislature for 24 years, the last 14 in the Senate. Ivy Taylor has a master's degree in city planning and served on the city staff in that capacity. For the last 4 years, she has been on city council, first representing the East Side District 2, then as interim mayor, replacing HUD Secretary Julian Castro. Welcome to you both. Leticia, I want to start with you. I want to start off by just saying, now that it's refined down to the two of you, I would like you to tell us what you think are the most important ways that distinguish you, not from the other 13 candidates, but from the one other candidate.
Thank you, Rick, for having us. And first of all, I'm very thankful to have been in the runoff. And this is historic, where you have two women at this time vying for the same position, and that's mayor of San Antonio. What I've said all along is that this race is going to boil down to leadership and effective leadership. I think the Express News probably said it the best when they did their endorsement. They spoke in terms of their endorsement of me as skilled leadership. I believe that what I bring to this city, that's my hometown and my family's hometown for generations, is that leadership, the ability to bring people together and to get things done. We've never lacked for that vision. We dream big. It's getting it done, and I think that I can do that.
Let me ask you about that, because there's a lot of difference between legislative party politics in Austin and city politics, whether here or anywhere else. And through the years, there's been very little interaction. Until term limits, when people had to find a place to go, the previous San Antonio City Councilman to go to the legislature was Henry B. Gonzalez. Nelson Wolff was briefly in the legislature, but other than that, we've had nobody come back to take a leadership role. I'm not sure if the politics tend to be different. There's things, it's about filling potholes, it's about really taking care of really practical things, whereas in the legislature you dealt with big issues, gun control, abortion, different things, social issues. So I'm not sure how that translates.
Leadership, it's about leadership. And it all begins with a conversation. What I did in the legislature was fight for San Antonio. And yes, we talk about the big systems, education, workforce, criminal justice. But it's also getting things done for UTSA, the Health Science Center, A&M San Antonio. The city council and I passed those pieces of legislation for local government. The Edwards Aquifer Authority, the Hospital District, VIA, the Port Authority. So let me tell you, there is a great interconnectedness between the government at the state level and at the local level. And I interacted regularly with city leaders throughout my time. But it's really the effectiveness of bringing people together with diverse views and finding that common goal, and you act for the public good. And I know that that's one of my strengths.
Okay, Ivy, the same question for you. How do you most distinguish yourself from your opponent, Leticia?
Well, I'm not a career politician. I am a city planner who for 17 years has been focused on how we can make San Antonio a better place to live through having stronger neighborhoods and balanced growth and more opportunity for our citizens. And I've worked on those issues in a very direct fashion. I'm coming up on my 6th year on the San Antonio City Council, and I also spent 6 years as an employee. So I very much understand the specific workings of our city hall.
I understated it at 4. Sorry, it's 6. That's true. How about the issue of you haven't been a politician, and it does require working with a lot of different people, reaching out and making contacts to make things happen.
Well, I have the leadership abilities and skills to work with different folks. I just don't do it through the lens of working through a party platform or with a specific group or interest group.
I want to. I'm have a little fun with this. You each had mailers that went out, and you had one that I didn't get, but it was interesting. In large type, it said, "Why did Texas Monthly call Ivy Taylor the anti-Castro?" So, for my first question, of course, is which Castro? Fidel, Raul, Joaquin, or Julian? But secondly, what did that mean? In what ways are you the anti-Castro?
Well, Texas Monthly was referring to Julian.
Right, but you must have approved at it.
Yes,
because you put it on there.
Yes, sure. And I enjoyed serving with him and believed that he certainly made some momentum and some progress for our city. I think the difference in our approach is that he was very specific. He was very focused on some short-term goals, and as a planner, I'm focused on the long-term for our city, because I understand that in order for us to make investments and make changes, many of those things will take many years to accomplish. And I'm also focused on systems, how we can improve our systems behind the scenes so that we can have a better outcome in relation to our economy and our fiscal responsibility and opportunity.
Does this say anything about your commitment to a couple of his major, fairly long-term things? One is pre-K for San Antonio, and another one is downtown development and especially a hemisphere.
Well, I've always been someone that was very interested in and focused on the center city, and so yes, that is a continued commitment for me and priority for me. As far as pre-K for SA, we're in year 3 and it's an 8-year program. I think at the end of that time, we'll have to determine whether or not that specific investment is how we as a city want to move forward, but I'm committed to ensuring that we have opportunities for learning at all levels, but in particular at the youngest levels as well.
Leticia, I and my neighbors, people in my part of town, received, actually our household received 2 mailings saying that you were the most conservative candidate. Now, you didn't send this out.
No.
No, the Police Officers Association, Police Union, sent it out in a campaign for you. It was arguing that you are conservative and cited things from having passed tort reform to a $1 billion tax cut, the fact that you have a concealed weapons license. Do you see yourself in that way?
I see myself as a Texan and a San Antonian. And on many issues, some people would call me very conservative. That's on property rights. I have been very vocal at the state level on property rights. I also know that I was the lead really debater on the margins tax, the state franchise tax, which is extremely discriminatory. But it was 2.5 hours that I fought, and we only lost that by 1 vote in the Senate. It was discriminatory, still is, and now most of the Republicans are trying to find a way to get out of that margins tax from the very beginning. It is a gross receipts tax. It is very discriminatory on small business.
This looks very much like an income tax, which you can't have, with the one distinguishing thing that is that you can be losing money and still have to pay the tax.
Absolutely. So on property rights, on medical privacy, on privacy issues, but mainly it's investments. I know that for us to be able to do the job at state, but even more so at the city, you have to have solid management. And so my record of getting things done is reforming systems so that we save money and that we invest properly so that you don't have huge costs on the out years. And that's, I think, a skill set that I bring to this mayor's office.
I will point out that Rice University political scientist Mark Jones uses a methodology mathematically to rank all the legislators as liberal to conservative. And you are right smack in the middle of the 11 Democratic senators.
That's right.
The most liberal Democratic senator is well to the left of the most liberal of the senators, of the Republican senators. So at least by this measure,
right. But Rick, I'm going to tell you that it is so erroneous to think that what we do at the Capitol is partisan. I'm going to tell you the majority of the issues that we did were rural versus urban, and it's water, those that have it and those don't. And my reputation at the Capitol is working with everybody to put San Antonio first, to put Texas first. Well, I'm in a very, very strong position here.
As you know, the law allows the police union to spend,
yes.
they can only give you $1,000, but they can spend an unlimited amount of money sending out these, as long as they don't coordinate it. And I will tell you that the evidence that they sent it to my neighborhood, where my father-in-law was the Republican precinct, it was a very lonely position. The fact they sent us indicated that they didn't coordinate with you, because I think you like Ivy wouldn't have been sending that message to that part of town.
No coordination.
Speaking of the police union, I want to focus on this. You know, Leticia has said that she got nothing for the police union endorsement, and I'll hear from you on this.
Yeah.
You've been close to the negotiations. You've been talking to the city manager, Cheryl Scully, and to the negotiators that work with her on this. And I mean, my impression from the outside is the police union is a very good negotiator, very tough negotiators.
Yes.
So I think there are a lot of people out there that find that hard to believe. I'm wondering if you're one of them that the police union would endorse without some kind of commitment.
Oh, certainly I find that hard to believe. And this is one of the, if not the biggest issue for our city in relation to our fiscal future. And we were very close to resolving this. I worked very hard to bring the police back to the table and establish a better relationship. And we worked point by point and got down to basically within one deal point, and they made the decision to make an endorsement. I said from the beginning that I would not seek nor accept an endorsement, because this is about not my political future or career, but it's about doing what's best in the interests of our San Antonio taxpayers. And I think that if Ms. Vanderpute had had those taxpayers' interests in mind, that she would not have accepted an endorsement either.
I'll bet you'd like to respond to that.
You know, I am proud to have the endorsement of the men and the women who put their lives on the line every single day for the people in San Antonio. And anybody that knows me knows that the reason that I got the endorsement wasn't based on any promises. In fact, in that interview, I didn't make any promise. I walked out of there thinking, I'm not going to get it, because I didn't say anything I think that they wanted to hear, except that they're going to be treated with respect, that it is paramount that we get back to the table and get this done, that the city's fiscal soundness, that we have to stay within those parameters. Why? Because we need more police officers. And that their endorsement of me was based on 2 decades of working solidly with the police and the fire and Austin to make sure that we had things like making sure that when they got spilled with bodily fluids, that there was testing to make sure that they weren't going to get an infectious disease or bring it home to their families. So let me tell you, they know when I put my foot down, I do, but anybody who says that I got this because I promised something, they don't know Leticia, and they weren't in the room. I was glad to get the endorsement. In fact, I thought it was going to go another way. But now that I have it, let me tell you, what I will do in the first days that I'm there is bring back people to the table, negotiate with respect. I think we're close to that point. But we want to make sure.
Will you maintain a commitment to fiscal stewardship that the council has already established?
I
that
have
we
said
don't
from
want
the
to
beginning,
go beyond a certain point of the general fund, percentage of the general fund budget.
What I said from the very beginning is that council set a parameter of 1/3 of the budget to go to other services and 1/3 of the general fund to go to public safety. Now that includes compensation, and it also includes training.
I'm sorry, is it 1/3 or 2/3?
It's 2/3 to public safety,
right, okay.
and then 1/3 of the budget to that. It's a 66%.
Yes.
But I think people believe that all of that is compensation. It isn't. It's your equipment, and it's the fire trucks and the cars and the training, which is very important.
But a huge part of it is salaries.
I absolutely believe that we have to fit that budget within that parameters, and I would follow that.
There's also been some confusion on as far as Ms. Van Pute's position related to the lawsuit. And at this point, the council feels that evergreen clause is a barrier to negotiations. And so
I want to make clear what we're talking about is a lawsuit that would try to get a court to undo something that both sides had agreed to before, which is that if they can't reach agreement, then the current contract stays in place for up to 10 years. Yeah. What is your position on the lawsuit?
I've got to tell you that it lacks that leadership quality when you can't get something done in a time frame. It's ridiculous that this has gone on for so long.
Well, it takes two to tango.
Well, and guess
and
what?
leaving the state when you don't get your way doesn't really demonstrate.
And now you're bringing up history.
Leadership too, so.
You're taking up history.
Why don't we keep it on the subject of what it needs to be with issues? I mean, we want to sling, that's fine. But I thought as mature women, we could start to discuss the issues because that's what the voters deserve. So what I have said constantly about this lawsuit is that I hate it when anybody has to run to the courthouse. Businesses, family members, but I think that the city has used it as leverage. 10 years, it is way too long. It's not workable for the city or the officers. How would you expect police officers to stay on the job for 10 years with no pay rate? I would like to see it at a point to where you've got to have something because police and fire don't go on strike. They can't.
They can't.
But we've got to negotiate that into something that's workable and I think a good time frame.
One last thing on that? If not, I want to get on to the election was, I thought, a ringing endorsement of the last period of time at City Hall. I mean, to give council members pay raise. Last time in 2004, shortly after some indictments of city council members, got creamed. But all the incumbents won except one, and he was often in the minority, but he got 47% of the vote. They voted to continue taxing themselves for parks and aquifer protection. So it seemed like people are pretty happy with City Hall, but still there are problems. There's a problem with housing. There's a problem with certainly transportation, especially traffic on the north side. Let's talk about that for a minute. Traffic jams in the suburbs can be just horrendous, up the 281 corridor and a little bit less than 10 corridor. How do you see approaching that problem?
Well, I think certainly we have to have a multifaceted approach in relation to addressing our transportation challenges. I mean, we have to look at partnering with the state on expanding road capacity, but we know that won't be the end-all, be-all. We've got to look at a more balanced approach related to our growth in our city, and that's why I've been pushing us looking at a comprehensive perspective, from a planning perspective. What are the different things that we can do as a community? How can we make investments that can alleviate that challenge for our citizens?
Leticia, in terms of dealing with those kind of traffic problems, I know on your website you've got a list of specific intersections, but it's bigger than that. It's moving people out to the suburbs.
You know, going to all parts of the city and hearing their concerns, they want a safe community. Our citizens want a safe community. And then they want to be able to get to their work or school or recreation in a time frame that doesn't rob them of precious time from their family or their work. We know that San Antonio has benefited for years on an interstate highway system that was built mainly because of our military bases to get troops deployed. And we enjoyed that. Now, we are paying the cost of not investing. And at the time when our federal government has restricted more and more of the funds, we've got to be smarter. Well, we've got to work cooperatively with the federal government.
We have to be smarter, but also, I want you both to answer this. Are you open to toll lanes to expand the highways, the major arteries?
I have always said that we need to give local people options. And that means bus rapid transit like we're doing at VIA. That means more park and ride. That means having communities where everybody's not trying to get out of the subdivision at the same time. And we are paying the cost. Most of the complaints I had, Rick, where, yes, once they get on 281, you know, they're frustrated, but it was the 20 minutes it takes them to get out of the subdivision. So it's the interconnectedness that we need to do a better job of.
I'm glad I gave up my last word because we're already running out of time.
Sure. Well, I would just say again, reiterate that through a community-driven process, we need to look at the full range of options that are available. You know, congestion-based pricing seems to be really effective in giving people a signal as to when to be on or off the road, and they can make that choice. But I think we should have a conversation about full range of options for transportation here.
Okay, so both of you could imagine having toll lanes despite some of the opposition that is out there.
Well, I think so, Rick, but we have seen too many transportation projects try to go through without that public support. I don't think we're going to be able to do any major expenditures or any real change unless we have that public support. And San Antonians, water and transportation, boy, they want to be involved in those decisions. And it's up that leadership to make that happen.
The citizens just ratified that through one of the measures that was on the ballot, saying that they'd like to weigh in on any rail project. And I'd also just like to point out that I worked with the council to put all those measures on the ballot and worked for their successful passage.
All right. Ivy Taylor, Mayor Ivy Taylor, former Senator Leticia Van Putte, thank you both for joining us.
Thank you, Rick.
Ross Ramsey, Executive Editor of the Texas Tribune, joins us from Austin. Hello, Ross.
Hey, Rick, how are you?
I'm fine, fine. Ross, we've already watched the battle between the House and the Senate over tax cuts, but now we've got another one that's arisen, and it's on something that Governor Abbott called for in his inaugural address, and that is ethics reform. Now they're arguing over ethics.
Yeah, they're fighting over little pieces. It's like there's not a real ethics package that has taken shape yet, that there are little pieces of an ethics package all over the place. To give you a really quick description of how this is going, Van Taylor, a senator from Plano, Texas, a Republican, filed what he said was Greg Abbott's ethics bill in the Senate, and he took 14 pages of legislation to committee, and he left committee with 5 pages intact. They added almost a dozen amendments on the floor and sent it over to the House. As soon as it got to the House, the chairman of the committee over there, Byron Cook, another Republican, looked at it and said, you know, this is, I'm not impressed.
He said it's weak ethical tea, something like that.
Weak ethical tea, right, exactly.
They had originally proposed some serious reform, or at least some cooling off period before legislators could become lobbyists. If I recall, that's out.
Right. So it's in and it's out. You know, so it's in the Senate bill. Cook says he's probably going to take that out. There's some language in there about whether people can pass legislation or work in agencies and then go to work for contractors who contract with the state. There's even a provision in the Senate bill that says legislators or people running for office would have to take urine tests to see if they're taking any illegal drugs. So we'd get to treat them like athletes, I guess.
I don't know how many of those people up there are taking illegal drugs, but they shouldn't do it.
Well, they're obviously not performance enhancing.
Although they, some of them seem to have been smoking a little marijuana this time, but that's a different story. So, what do you get a sense of whether they're going to pass something that could pass the governor's test, or does he have much of a test on this? It was pretty general.
I think he's going to take whatever he can get on ethics. During his campaign against Wendy Davis last year, Abbott was critical of her law firm doing business with government entities. And she wasn't doing business, it didn't appear, with any government entities directly with the state, but she was doing legal business for and bond business for road authorities and others who in turn did business with the state. Abbott said there were ethical questions about that, and one of the provisions that he's looking for is some kind of control or at least disclosure of those kinds of relationships. So that'll be something that they're looking for. Every legislator or interest group with some ethical problem, from whether lawmakers and lobbyists ought to report when they're having dinner together to entertainment to you name it, has got some stake in this thing. And how many of those are important to Greg Abbott, we'll just have to wait and see at the end to see if whatever bill gets to him he's happy with.
Well, it's often been said about ethical legislation that sunlight is the best bleach or the best purifier. There was some, I know that was proposed, that would require the Texas Ethics Commission to put a number of things online, like entertainment from lobbyists, like their income statements, which now, people in the valley would have to drive for 6 hours to go up to the commission during hours and working hours to look that up.
Right. As it stands, they just report that on a printed form, and the commission, you can go over there and get it. You can actually go over there and get an electronic copy of the PDF. They're not searchable. We've put all of those on our website, but we had to go over there and ask for them and get them and process them. What this would do, what this proposal would do, is basically say file these electronically so anybody can look them up, in their pajamas from San Antonio or Amarillo or wherever.
I would like that. One last thing, we've seen a lot of fights between the Senate and the House. You told me a story about a great quote on that. Tell it to us.
Yeah, Sam Rayburn was the Speaker of the Texas House and then became Speaker of the U.S. House in a time when Democrats were in charge of everything. And they got into some scrap, and he told everybody, gentlemen, it was mostly gentlemen in those days, gentlemen, the Republicans are the opposition. The Senate is the enemy.
It sounds like Austin's coming to that point now. Ross Ramsey from the Texas Tribune, thank you.
Thank you.
We've set up a link to the Texas Tribune website. Just go to klrn.org/TexasWeek. And that's it for Texas Week. See you next time.
Texas Week with Rick Casey is made possible by the generous support of the William and Salome Scanlon Foundation, supporting educational, environmental, and Hispanic cultural initiatives. The John and Florence Newman Foundation, encouraging an informed community. The Daniel J. Sullivan Family Foundation, and visionaries like members of KLRN.